debt because man was never supposed to die. It brought back a spiritual debt. The spiritual debt, there was no more communication with God. And the eternal debt is our souls are completely condemned or condemned, and there's no chance out.
Because Adam didn't listen.
Because he disobeyed. He disobeyed God. And this is why it's so important as Christians not to be disobedient to God and try and not to commit sin. Adam. Yes.
Yeah, but Eve did it first.
Eve did it first, and then it transferred to Adam. Because you got to understand something, Brother Donald. When someone sins, it doesn't stop with that one person. It always goes on to someone else. And because of disobedience and because of sin, there is now death that was going on. So that was the first end of innocence. This is where dispensation, where the innocence ends in judgment. This is where the dispensation of innocence, because God was dealing with people in innocence. What does it mean is innocence? They didn't know. Because they didn't know, He was dealing them with innocence. But as soon as they ate the fruit, what happened? They had knowledge and wisdom, and they knew. So guess what? Innocence, the dispensation of innocence, exactly, because of innocence ended, because when they ate the fruit, they had knowledge and wisdom. That dispensation ends in judgment. And here's where the judgment kicks in. 3 curses was given because of the fall of man. The serpent received the first curse, and this is what God cursed him. He said, "Thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast upon the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and thou shalt eat the dust of all the days of thy life." Then the woman received the second curse, and it says this: "I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, and in thy sorrow shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall have rule over thee." Then the third part of the curse is this: that the ground was cursed for Adam's sake. "In thy sorrow thou shalt eat all the days of thy life. Thorns and also thistles shall bring forth to thee, and the thorns, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field in the sweat of thy face, and thou shalt eat bread till thou return unto the ground. For out of the ground thou hast taken, from out of the ground you shall return." What God did there is He cursed the serpent. The first person that was to be cursed was the Dusmano, was the serpent. If you go back and if you study, the serpent didn't always crawl on its hands, didn't always crawl on his belly. He had hands and he had feet, and he was able to walk. But because Hatta Jalus was up,
Did he have the face of a man or a snake?
Pero Sonio, it was a serpent, but the serpent had feet and it had hands.
It was the most
creature
most
in the garden.
That's right.
most conniving.
He would run away, but he was pleasant to the eye.
He was the most conniving, the most subtle, was the most conniving. He was the most conniving animal of all the filth. And because he connived Eve, the first curse was cursing Sajalis, and he told him that because you did this, you're going to be walked, you're going to eat the dust of the ground, meaning
God threw him out of heaven.
no, he actually cursed the serpent, the snake.
The
snake.
Because Pastor David, I'm sorry, but
No, go ahead.
did Satan possess the snake? Is that why the snake, the creature, was cursed, or is it because Satan is not the snake, but he possessed the snake?
Well, you got to understand something. He possessed the snake, and he used the snake. And because the snake was usable, he cursed the snake all the days of its life.
Okay.
He cursed it.
This is not Lucifer.
No.
This is not the one that God threw down.
Well, you got to understand something, Sister Sonia. He cursed the snake for 2 reasons. Because here it is. It's a physical curse, and it's a spiritual curse too, also. And this is what I'm getting into. First, he cursed them by his hands and his feet, and he made it to crawl on the ground. But this is the second curse. I'm going to go ahead and get into the second curse for the snake also. And the woman, he made it more harder for her. I can't really get into that, but we all know the reason why he made it more harder for women. The husband was one of the most worstest curses, and he told them, because you did this all the days of your life from Caschino, now you have to work for your bread. And when you eat your bread, you're going to have to work by the sweat of your brow. And because you were made from the ground, thus you're going to return to the ground. Because remember, in Genesis 1, he created man from the dust of the world. And he told them, because you did sin, you're going to go back where you came from. And he also cursed the ground. Remember, in Eden, there was no thistles, there was no thorns. You would just
everything that fell would grow.
Exactly. You would just drop a seed and it would grow. But now, because God cursed the ground, do you know that every time you plant the seed, there's always 10 or 15 weeds before the seed could come up?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's
then
where
you got to take the weeds out.
You got to take the weeds out before you could get to the fruit, because this was cursed for Adam's sake. God cursed the ground for Adam's sake. The curse is still upon the ground because we know how easy weeds grow. A weed could produce 2 seeds on the ground, and then the first year and the other following year, in the first seed is damaged or perished. After that, it spreads a second seed, and immediately it springs up. And this is the opposite of useful plants. This only grows by much toil and cultivation. 4 sequences involved from their sin. There was a physical suffering with many burdens to bear. There was a mental suffering and haunting and fear. There was a social suffering that their children had also had to bear the curse. And the greatest of all this was the spiritual suffering, because now they were separated from God. What it was talking about is that they not only halachino mentally, but darasa, it was in fear too. And that not only that it fell on them, it fell on their children too. So it also fell on their children. And then the most important thing is, it fell on them spiritually, because there was no more communication with God. We as humans, when we are hungry at the foolishness of man's, when we as humans would be hungry at the foolishness of man's sin, God in His mercy gave us a promise, and He would put the enemy, between the seed of the woman and between the seed of her seed, and it shall bruise the head of the serpent, and it shall bruise the heel of her feet. And that's in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. And speaking, the serpent, God would promise an ultimate victory for man. Woman caused the fall, and a woman was to be the source of redemption. Now, this is what it's talking about here. Because woman caused the fall, God was going to be able to put a seed there, and her seed would bruise the heel of the serpent, but the serpent would bruise, her heel would bruise the head of the serpent, but the serpent's head would bruise her heel. And this is what it's talking about. Through Mary, Jesus was come forth, and Jesus would conquer the dushmano through His blood. You understand? Because you got to understand something. Woman was the one that caused the fall. So it had to come through woman to fix the fall. Yeah. And the way that it would come through is that we know Jesus Christ came through Mary. Now, what He was talking about, bruise her heel, is that He was going to go on the cross and He was going to rise again. But what He was talking about, where the serpent would bruise the heel of the woman, is that Jesus would have to suffer to pay that price.
Amen.
Do you understand now what I was talking about there?